Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the ICE technical meeting, the impact of climate change on water security in Makassar and cities in Australia. This event is brought to you by the Institution of Civil Engineers or ICE. My name is Ariel Delano, and it is a pleasure to act as your master ceremony in this event. Before we start, allow me to read the rundown of our event this evening. First, I will be reading the rules of the webinar. Second, there will be opening remarks by Mr. David Me. After that, the event will be guided by Mr. Chris Sandeman as our operator to start the presentation of uh, information. This webinar is also live streamed on our YouTube channel in ICE-JLA, or you can easily visit the link in below. You can submit your question for the speaker at the Q&A session later through the raise hand feature. Located at the bottom of the screen, the question should be in English, and the host or moderator will later allow you to talk. Now, I would like to invite Mr. David Me to give his opening remark. To Mr. David, the time is yours.
Okay, my name is David Mir. I'm your new Indonesian ICE representative of yesterday. So it's my pleasure, instead of Phil's, to welcome everyone here from the ICE Jakarta members, including our BNUS members. Junior engineers and guests who are joining from Jakarta and even further afield. There are guests who I have invited from as far away as Turkey. So hopefully they can all listen in. I would like to thank Ibu Dewi for volunteering to give this talk. Which is of great interest to many of us. It's a subject that many of us are also working on and in this field. Most projects now have components to provide resilience against perceived impacts of climate change. In 2019, I worked on a project with the ADB to look at 8 water supply projects and their possible impacts of climate change on something like 8 cities in Indonesia. And I've invited 2 of my associates on that project to join. I have been to Ujung Pandang twice. The second time was on the way back from Binjai on the other side of the island, and I can remember stopping at the highest point on the ridge overlooking Ujung Pandang, not particularly to look at the stars, for other reasons, but it was the clearest I've ever seen the sky. The Milky Way was so visible everywhere. It was so impressive. So I very jealous of Ibu Dewi for being able to spend so much time in what's a very interesting city. I would just like to read out 1 or 2 of the other of the forthcoming talks that will be given by the Jakarta Association over the next couple of months. In July, Mary has arranged for Ian Partridge to give a presentation on forensic engineering. In August, we hope Bet Hammers will give a talk on design of sports facilities. I've arranged in September for the ADB representative for water resources to give a talk on water resource projects coming to Indonesia and those that are going on. So that should be quite interesting. And in Milani is arranging in August as well for 3 talks, I think, from BENUS students in not in a competition, but in a little competitive session, and we're looking forward to that. I've also arranged for 2 of my current engineers to give a talk on their work on a project in Merauke on irrigation, and to explain to BENUS students what their impressions were of starting work for an engineering company. And I think that's about Bob is going to give a talk on dam rehabilitation sometime perhaps after December next year. We hope to have a structural challenge, but as it has to be an event where everyone comes together, this may be not until next year as well, but we have to see how life is changing in Indonesia. So on that, I'd like to hand over to Chris Sandyman to introduce the speaker.
Hello, are we there?
Yeah, we can hear you, Chris.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't clear. Good evening to everyone. Welcome indeed. I met tonight's speaker, Dr. Dewi Kirono, when we were preparing a World Bank project in Jakarta in 2017. And she gave a presentation to the project team about some work that she'd recently completed on the security of the water supply for Makassar. I immediately thought this would be an interesting topic for the an ICE technical meeting, and she kindly agreed to the idea. However, Dr. Dewi lives and works in Australia and only makes brief visits back to Indonesia, and we were unable to find a suitable time over the years which followed. One of the few benefits of the global coronavirus pandemic is that we have learned how to have virtual meetings with people all over the world, and because of that, we, the ICE-JLA members and the BENUS students, now have the opportunity to learn from Dr. Dewi's experience in climate change and water security. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Dewi at last to the ICE Jakarta Local Association. She grew up in a small village at the foot of Mount Welirang in East Java, which is about 75 kilometers south of Surabaya, and developed an early interest in water, later training as a hydroclimatologist. She has 30 years experience in research, teaching and consulting on the subject of climate change, hazard and impact in Australia, Asia and the Pacific. She's now Principal Research Scientist at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation's Climate Science Centre in Melbourne, Australia. Dr. Dewi decided that she'd like to broaden the scope of tonight's webinar to include not only the Makassar study, but also some of her more recent work in Australia. Anyway, I'm sure that we're all eager to hear what she's got to tell us about the impact of climate change and on water security and the innovative solutions that are being adopted in Australia to increase resilience to climate change. So, without more ado, over to you, Dr. Dewi.
Thank you so much, Chris. and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all virtually through Zoom tonight. And it is an honor for me to give presentation today. So thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you, Pak Chris, for such a kind word on the introduction. So Pak Chris already mentioned about what I will be going to present, so I will not repeat about that. But I will start with a couple of reasons why I chose this topic. Because water crisis has been identified as the top global risk in the past 15 years or so. So every year, the World Economic Forum decided or identified the global risk. And water crisis is always in the top corner here, together with the natural disaster, cyber attacks, things like that. Whereas the critical infrastructure or failure is around in the middle of the year. So in the last 15 years or so, water crisis is always considered as the top global risk. So I think it is timely that if we talk about this subject on this webinar. The second consideration is also, maybe most of you already know, that the United Nations has a new Sustainable Development Agenda, which there are 17 of it. And the agenda number 6 is providing clean water and sanitation. So this talk would be relatively relevant to that, because I know many engineers would like to help us try finding solution for that. And also related to the agenda number 11 and 13, which is sustainable cities and communities and climate action. So hopefully this talk cover at least sort of relevance to 3 sustainable development agendas. So when I talk about water security, what I mean by that is that an attempt to make the balance for the water supply and the water demand. So water security means a particular place can supply the water demand. So on the other hand, water supply, there are many sources like rainwater, surface water, groundwater, and the sort of human technology kind of thing, which in this case I show desalinated water. On the other side, water demand can be also categorized into several places. Most common one is the domestic, but agriculture, industry, as well as providing back the water to make sure the environmental flows and the healthiness of the environment is also as important. So all of this, of course, affected by many factors. Most of all, of course, the climate, because the climate is creating the water resources like the rainwater and surface water. And the population will influence on the demand side, for example. So when planning infrastructure or planning a city or planning a water supply system, usually engineers will utilizing many tools to deal with this. And one example is to have a modeling that including so many factors that affecting the water supply and water demand. For example, in this case, I give you a picture that showing we need to consider the land use, the climate, the irrigation, the cities, the ecological assets, the dam, and etc. And just to give you an example, maybe most of you already aware of this, that rainwater in Indonesia is quite large compared to Australia, for example. You know, we are very rich in terms of rainfall. the average is about 2.3 meters per year. So that you can imagine that's a big chunk of water. But some island like the NTB and NTT is only receiving half of them. So there is some variability in terms of the spatial rainfall in Indonesia, as most of you know it. In terms of the total water availability and demand in Indonesia, actually the water supply is very good in terms of the water demand. In this case, water supply are plenty compared to the water demand. The issue is the water supply sometimes is not available where it is needed most, or sometimes it's coming when the wet season, for example, while the dry season we got less. So according to the recent ADB assessment, the surface water availability, for example, plenty in Papua, in Kalimantan, but in Java, where, you know, more than 80% of population living is only about 4%. So that's what I mean by, you know, the water demand is not being met by the water supply, for example, in Java. And in terms of the demand for the urban, there is an increase from year to year, of course. And again, there is a very high demand in Java, as in yellow here, and then Sumatra, and less in Maluku and Papua, of course. So there is variability in there as well. So in total, Indonesia is okay, but especially the water security can be some issue. And in addition to that, the recent issue, that not recent actually, it's already in the past 30 years or so, is the so-called global warming that causing global climate change as well, which in turn will create the regional climate change. So now I would like to introduce you about the latest science or knowledge about the global warming as well as the regional climate change as a context before I talking about the Makassar work that we did. So in terms of the warming, this is a graph showing the temperature of the world from 1850 to 2018. And as you can see here, the black line showing the increase of temperature, the whole globe of about 1.2. And if we look at the land only without ocean, then that increase is very high, which is about 1.5. So we can say that, oh, what's the point we concerned about this? 1 degree increase, it doesn't matter, you know. I can have an air condition, for example, to live. But, you know, we are talking about very big organism here, which is the world. I don't think we can have an air condition for the world. That's number one. Number two, the world is just like our human body. When our body increase about 0.4 or 0.7 degree, we are already considered as having a fever, or, you know, we need to see the doctor or something like that. So the same, the world like that too. If we already increase in 1 degree, then everything will change. You may call it the world is having a fever or something like that. So regionally, this is what the warming that has been seen. So most of the highest warming, which is more than 3 degrees, is around the Arctic. And then for Indonesia, around here is around 0.75 or 0.8, depending on the location. And again, as I said, 0.8 for a place as big as Indonesia could be matter, because that can trigger the change in the weather system, the rainfall, the evaporation, etc. So that is what has been observed. Now I will show you what will be projected in the future. So basically, climate modeler developed a global climate model. And then according to how the world going in terms of greenhouse gas emission scenarios, the future will be different. So we are at the moment in here, which is around 2021. So in the future, if we are going into business as usual, just like what we're doing now without COVID or things like that, the world temperature can go as far as 4 degrees by the end of this century. But if the world able to mitigate or reduce the greenhouse gas emission, then we may only end up around 1 degree or 2 degrees at the maximum. So this one is very ambitious scenarios, because at the moment we are tracking around this line here. But who knows, if we're doing together, hopefully we can achieve that. So now I'm turning toward about if the global warming is 1.5 degree, what will happen regionally? On the left side here, I'm showing you the mean temperature change, which is around 0.5 to 8 degree here. And Indonesia is around here. So if the global warming about 1.5 degree, then Indonesia will also around there, not more than that. In terms of the precipitation change, if the globe is warming 1.5 degree, then Indonesia will experience overall reduction about 5%, but there are also places that experience 5% of increase. So I hope that gives you a flavor of what the latest science about the climate change, which need to be considered now in most of the project, as David may already mentioned earlier. Now I would like to turn toward the work that we did that Pak Chris mentioned earlier. We did assessment on the impact of climate change on water security in Makassar. And this is a photo of the Losari beach when it's still undergoing the development. Now it's more beautiful than this, which is very popular place to visit. So just to give you a bit of background on that. So Makassar is most populated city in Eastern Indonesia. As you know, it has 1.5 million population right now. And it relies on surface and groundwater resources. And Makassar share with another district in terms of the water resources, which is coming from the Pili-Pili Dam here. And of course, as in Indonesia, the water resource is highly seasonal because it's experienced wet season and dry season. And at the time of the study, only 60% of population served by the water company or PDRM. So after talking with the stakeholder over there, we decided to study 4 things. The first one is to understand what is the current and future climate change in Maminasata, which is the metropolitan region, just like Jabodetabek, something like that. And then we look at the stream flow and soil erosion so that we can analyze the water security in Makassar city. And then after that, together with the player there, we identified some solution. So now I'm going to show you some of the results from this study, and starting with the observation in the last 60 years or so. So this graph showing you the rainfall during the dry season at the top and the wet season at the bottom. The dark blue meaning the year where it is La Nina, meaning the rainfall usually higher than normal. And the light blue is El Nino event, which usually manifests as a lower rainfall over there. So as you can see, in terms of the long-term trend, the dry season has a reduction, but the wet season is relatively stable because of the high variability of rainfall over there. And in terms of the projection, this is the picture showing the mean annual temperature from 1970 to 2100. The black one here is the observation, and the red one are the projected or the modeled one. So as you can see, we could expect that in Makassar, there could be an increase of around 2 degrees over there. And what does that mean on rainfall and potential evaporation? So this is the projected change in rainfall for South Sulawesi. If we look at the annual, red meaning reduction, blue meaning becoming wetter. So as you can see, the west coast is getting reduction, most of them, but potential evaporation, of course, it's increasing everywhere because the temperature is increasing, humidity getting less, etc. The next result I'm showing you is the soil erosion mapping, which is conducted by the University of Hasanuddin in Makassar. So this is the current map of soil erosion, red meaning very heavy soil erosion. And for the future, using climate scenarios, this is what will happen if we are using 5 scenarios for the future. As you can see, most of the places relatively the same, meaning that soil erosion still be a problem over Mamina Sata region. And a student of UNHAS has done a study estimating the lifetime of Bili-Bili Dam is becoming 12 or 17 years if the sedimentation from the soil erosion is keep going, basically, without any intervention like digging up the sediment or things like that. In terms of stream flow, I show you a couple of results. So this is a stream flow that coming into the Bili Dam, which is the important water resource for Makassar. So the black line here is the current model observation, whereas the blue one is what will be projected in the future. So as you can see, there are possibility that in the future there is a reduction in stream flow coming into the Bili-Bili Dam. And the next one, I'm showing you what will happen in terms of the location near the water treatment plant intake, which is used by PDAM. And again, showing you the current and then the future in the blue one. As you can see, there is a potential reduction, especially during the December to May period kind of thing. So overall, our work find that mean annual flow could reduce by 10 to 30%, and the number of low flow days could increase by 5 to 20%. So after that, we then trying to see the impact on water supply demand in Makassar using the river urban water model. To do that, we consider future scenario as well as current scenarios, many, not just future climate, but also what is the population, what is the demand, the infrastructure and operation rule, etc. And I will show you a couple of results on that. The first one is, what if the master plan was implemented or was not implemented? So if Makassar doesn't implement the infrastructure upgrade according to the master plan, the water demand that can be met will be stay below 60% here up until 2050. And the square and the circle here is showing the scenario of the climate in the future. And if master plan is upgraded or implemented, then in Makassar will be able to provide 80% of population, but by 2050 it will come down to 60 again. So two conclusions from this, that climate scenarios doesn't give so much impact on this particular analysis. Master plan or the infrastructure give more importance to providing the water. Having said that though, by 2050, even if infrastructure upgraded, there is a need to do something else. So the next result that I will show you is what if we could manage the demand and distribution leakage in Makassar. So here I'm showing you the graph on the Makassar water demand from 2010 to 2050. And the future capacity, according to the master plan, if implemented, will be around this one. Through the modeling, we can do several scenarios in terms of water demand and distribution leakage. So for example, if we are considering the 165 demand and 15% leakage, then Makassar will sort of, the demand will increase the supply by around 27 or something like that. But if the leakage is about 30%, then before 2030, Makassar will no longer be able to meet the demand, even if the master plan already implemented. So this sort of modeling will help us to do with several scenarios according whatever we would like to assess basically. So in this case, this analysis help us to know whether we can defer or downside future investment depending on the scenario of the water demand and leakage. So just to summarize, basically the studies show that the problems related with water availability and high sedimentation will still occur in the future. Without infrastructure upgrades, water shortage will be common around 2020. But even infrastructure upgraded, it may only provide short-term solution. So in this case, need to explore solution that combining infrastructure and preventive measure, such as demand management and behavior change, for example. So maybe this is a bit hard because it is meaning cultural change or social change. But I think we can do it if there is a will for that. And I would like to show you some examples from Australia. And that is what I would like to turn my speech now into what happened in Australia, just to give a flavor or additional information for context when we do things for Indonesia, for example. So Australia has a different challenge because, as you know, Australia is the driest inhabited continent. So in terms of water availability, Australia is only here, whereas Asia is around this one. So you can see Australia only have a very limited amount of water compared to Indonesia, for example. On the contrary, per capita water use of Australia is the highest. Asia is around half of it. Australia is this one. But please note that this is including irrigation, not just water consumption for human. So you can see there is a big challenge already there because we only have little, but we use plenty, which is in comparison to Indonesia, I've shown you earlier, is different. And also, when we talk about Australian cities only, it's rely on rainfall. So for example, the surface water is 42%, and the rest of it is little, and the book supply is also about 42. So basically, rainfall is still the main source of the Australian cities' water supply. So that when there is a climate change which influence the rainfall pattern over there, that become a very big change in Australia. So what is the challenge in addition to that we face? The first one is I would like to show you what the climate change in Australia is. So this is showing you the temperature over Australia from 1910 to 2040. So this is the observation. We are trending upward, and 2019 is up here, which is around 2 degrees compared to the sort of early, not 2 degrees, sorry, about 1.7 degrees, which is beyond the projected level. So this is the projected level. And who knows, it could be go that way or, could be that way. But the temperature increase over there is much more than what we've seen in Indonesia. In terms of rainfall, there is a very big decrease. For example, in my state, which is in Victoria, in Melbourne, there is a trend downward here. And the projection will be lower in the future. And the same for the Southwest Australia, there is a very big decline in there. And I will show you the impact of that in the next couple of slides from this. So in terms of water supply and demand imbalance, water demand is higher, as I showed earlier. And then in the future, it's becoming larger as well. So Australia is above the world in terms of demand. But in terms of the supply, there is a decrease in flow to the river. So I pick a picture here showing you a very big river in Australia, equivalent to like a Berantas or a Bengawan Solo in Java, which coming through 6 states. So in the past, the average of inflow coming to the river is about 10 gigaliter per year. But in the past 20 or 30 years or so, it's dropped, becoming only 4.8 gigaliter per year. So that is a very, very big drop. Another challenge, including the pressure of the environmental flow into the receiving environment, urban flooding like Indonesia as well, and erosion like in Indonesia as well. So some of the solution that has been taken is using what they call, the integrated approach to urban water management. So it is basically the integration of making sure that the water quality that being used for consumption is fit for purpose. And then the integration of disposal of unwanted wastewater and management of storm and flood and waters. So that could contribute to meeting water outcomes, public health, environment, as well as urban amenity as well. So this is the whole thing can be another speech in itself, but I will not dig into detail of that. So I'll just give you a few examples on how this being implemented in over there. Yeah. So I'll just give you the first example here, which is water supply diversification in Perth City, which is over here. This desalination plants now produce 48% of Perth water supply. Second water supply type that they're trying as well is turning stormwater into drinking water. In this case is putting the stormwater into aquifer storage during the wet season and then taking out during the dry season. So this is a technology that CSIRO has developed in the past 10 years and has been implemented in many cities in Australia. So why did I choose this example? Because Perth has been experiencing a very high population increase. On the other hand, the inflow to dam is very highly reduced. So the dam can only supply a relatively large in the past, but recently is only little. So they starting to use the groundwater. So for example, in the 92% water supplied by the dams, but by 2004, it's more groundwater rather than the dams. And now it's not enough. So they have to do the desalination and the groundwater replacement. So as you can see now, the fraction of the desalination is 50% supplying the total population. So I hope I just would like to give you a picture that, you know, water supply diversification can be one thing that we can go if there is a issue with water security. The second example is managing the water demand. I give you an example from Sydney here. So this is a graph showing the water saving from managing demand by many activities like regulatory measure, recycled water, leakage reduction, etc. As you can see, Sydney has been very successful in doing that. There is an increase every year in water saving in that city. So even though the demand, the water demand is increasing from 1991 to the recent, you know, like the red line here. I mean, the population increasing, the water demand can be managed and can be reduced. So this is another example of success story as well that can be hopefully can be applicable somewhere else as well. The last example that I will give you is what usually called water sensitive urban design. And this has been popular in many cities in Australia. So for the new development, they always required to do the water sensitive urban design. So here I just give you one example of the Atherton Gardens, which is high-rise residential building for 3,000 people. They have a feature of rainwater harvesting, man-made landscape to keep the water from rain, and then recycled water, communal wastewater treatment, etc. And this example have benefits, for example, saving 3,000 liters per week, which is a lot in terms of, you know, the less rain that received by Australia, as I mentioned earlier. And the new water resource can be used to irrigate water, for example. And more importantly, this place can help contributing to reducing water pollution. So in summary, Australia is the driest inhabited continent, but highest per capita in terms of water use. And some solution is including integrated urban water management. And I show you some examples for that. And so in this case, sustainable provision of clean water, which is the SDG number 6, actually could be achieved while we also doing the SDG number 11, which is sustainable cities and communities, as well as doing the SDG 13, which is climate action, and this particular through the integrated urban water management. But this is a concept which is relatively new for many people. So there are potential barriers for adoption. This including social rather than technical, and needs capacity building, not just for the people, but also the engineers, the tradies, the builders, you know, as well as the fragmented policy and governance. Because doing integration when we have a fragmented policy and governance is very challenging. But it can be done, as I've already showed you using some Australia cities. So I hope I gave you some inspiration, and hopefully this is useful. So thank you so much for the opportunity again. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to receive your feedback or question or comment. Thank you. Over to you, Pak Chris.
Thank you very much, Dewi. That's very interesting indeed. And I'm not sure whether we have questions come in yet, or whether people are now, sorry, I'm just coming back, or whether people are now formulating questions. Obviously, in the situation in Australia is rather more critical than it is here, but it's a bit shocking to hear that Java is only 4% balance there. It's one of the key things, obviously, is not wasting water, and you pointed out that Sydney has been very successful in reducing demand. Here in Indonesia, I work with, at the moment, working with some smaller water companies, and what we're finding is that actually they don't even know how much water they're losing, which they're not metering it properly. And although they report figures every year for the water that they've lost, the figures are completely unreliable in many cases, not all cases, of course, but many cases. So we've got a long way to go here in Indonesia on dealing with water loss, and at the same time trying to expand the water supply service, which is still a long way from the Sustainable Development Goal of 100% access. It's so yes, a bit of a contrast in the between the two countries. Maybe I know that David May has been also working very much on climate change and from the water resources point of view. So I'm wondering if he's got a question, but I can't see it at the moment.
I think Pak David raised
I
his
do
hand.
have my hand up, Chris.
Oh, well, I can't see it. Sorry.
Yeah, panelists can't put a hand up.
Sorry?
Oh, the panelists can't put a hand up.
Oh, right.
All right.
Okay. Well, that may be why I couldn't see it. So, David, let's have your question.
Well, I usually try and encourage the Indonesian students to ask the first questions, and if there's any hands up from the BINA students, I'd like them to ask the question first. If not, I'll ask my question.
On my screen, there's nothing from them.
Okay, I'll ask my question, because I've done a lot on particularly on climate change impacts on irrigation, and our study in Jati showed that a 2-degree increase in temperature would increase evapotranspiration by between 14 and 17% over a year. And I just wondered if Dr. Dewi compared the trends of water use in Ujung Pandang, comparing water supply and irrigation, and did it become very critical, and at what year does it become very critical if the two trends continue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as part of the Makassar study, we also looking at the irrigation, even though we are not very comprehensive because of limitation in data. What we found is if we take into account the irrigation, then the supply for the PDAM that taken from the Bili-Bili Dam becoming more variable from 1 year to year in terms of availability to meet the demand. So the one that I showed earlier, the one which did not include irrigation. But if we put irrigation demand as part of it, then it will become more sort of, variable from year to year. So what I mean is we will expect that the time when water supply cannot meet the demand will be higher. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you for your answer. It's a problem that's facing both water supply and irrigation, and there's been a lot of change in the development agencies in trying to encourage farmers to switch to high value irrigation using pipe systems, because they use about a third the amount of water that rice irrigation does. So it's a question of crop per drop or
Yeah.
profit per drop is becoming more important.
Yes.
And the hope is that particularly on coarse sandy soils that we can persuade farmers to change over to piped irrigation of high value crops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually climate change also create opportunity. So where particular area cannot be grown a certain variety of plant could be introducing a new plant, for example. So we shouldn't see climate change as a thing that very bad, everything, but actually there are some opportunities as well. Yeah. Just like in Thailand, they're doing a different kind of planting based on the knowledge of climate change. Yeah. And farmers doing that without knowledge of climate change, because they observe what happened in their environment already. Yeah.
Yes, in the UK, in the south of England, we're better able to grow grapes and produce wine. So that's a big benefit for the UK.
Yeah. I think there is an attendee who raised the hand, Pak Yasri.
yes,
Very
that's
good.
right.
Okay.
Yasri Chianto, please.
I want to ask a question. I'm from Makassar, right? And in Makassar, water supply is very cheap. So there is no people in Makassar concerned about water security or anything or climate change. So what do you think the concern that we don't know, the concern that we must know about our future in water?
Okay.
Did you hear that, David?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Chris. Thank you, Yasri, for the question. Yes, I think when we did the study, we learned about that, Pak Yasri. So having said that, though, one of the manager in the PU, which is the Pekerjaan Umum, he said that, by bringing climate change issue into their sort of, awareness, it gives opportunity for him to bring back the environmental issue into the table when discussing planning, for example. Because when doing the planning at the governmental level, in the past, environmental issue already no longer a hot topic or sexy topic.
Sorry,
So using the
that's not my question.
yeah. No, I'll answer on the government first, and then in terms of the people, so part of the solution is so the government identified some part of the solution is raising awareness, working together with them, the community. I mean, so I have not shown that part of the solution in this talk, but I can share with you later on if you like offline. So as after understanding the problem, together with the government and the community in Makassar, we identified some solution basically. And I cannot explain it on top of my head at the moment, but I can share it with you offline if you like. And the other concern, to answer one of your question as well, the other concern is related to what Pak Chris mentioned earlier. We don't know how much we consume. For example, we don't know how much is the groundwater being extracted in Makassar or in other city, because usually the monitoring of groundwater is doing ad hoc, only, inside or not continuous. So we don't actually know how much is the groundwater, for example, that being extracted or being having. Yeah. So I hope that answer your question, Payasri.
It's different from my question. My question is like about the concern of the people. Just like everybody see that everybody doesn't concern about climate change and water security. Everybody, even every company, still use or drink water from the plastic bottle. So there is no concern about climate change and water security in Makassar. So what is the real concern that we must have in the future that we don't understand or we don't see it in our eyes? That's what I mean. It's all. My question is almost about mentality of the people in Makassar. So uh, uh, I think it's hard, but everybody still just like uh, we have climate change problem, but they still use the plastic bottle, not bringing water from home. Like example, they still use the plastic bottle, use plastic bag, and everything that hurt and destroy climate change. So what's the real concern we need to know?
I think, Payasri, what you're really looking for, I think, or what we need here is political leadership, and I'm afraid that often tends to come once the crisis has developed, rather than at the time that we identify it as a potential future problem.
Yes.
So it's a really a political issue, and you mentioned that water is cheap and plentiful, and of course, this is one of the problems in Indonesia, is that we sell water too cheaply.
It's not
and that, again, it's a political issue, because whenever the PDM tries to increase the price, there's a tremendous political resistance to it. So we really need better educated politicians, I think, in these matters, which is, of course, very difficult. But thank you for your question, Payasri. It's certainly an interesting and good to have somebody join us from Makassar. We've got a question from Papandi, MS. Is Papandi on the line?
I see.
I can't hear him, but I'll read the question that I can see. He thanks you for your presentation, Dr. Dewi, and he says that you studied the water security of Makassar by looking from the water infrastructure development or capacity as planned in the master plan. But I think it could be studied further by looking at the river basin scale in order to know whether we still have room to develop more infrastructure.
Yep. Thank you, Pak Pandi. I think that is a really good point. Yes, and that what the Hasanuddin University plan to do after the project finish, because when we assess the climate change, it is at the sort of South Sulawesi level, including the Maminasata and the basin level kind of thing. But in terms of water security, back then is only Makassar. But yes, we certainly encourage to do that. Yeah, I agree basically. Yeah.
Right. Any more questions from Venus students? I don't have any in front of me. David, have you got any further?
I think
No, I was just hoping that some of the Venus students, if not want to ask questions directly, they can put their question on the chat line. I'd like Papandu is my associate on the ADB study of water supply projects, and so he's I think he's still working on the project.
And there are a couple of hand raising from Pak Mike and
I can't.
Brilliant.
I'm sorry, I can't see that.
Oh, okay, yeah. Pak Mike and Ibu Brilliant Palakian.
Hello, my name is Brilliant Palagian. I'll ask some question. By the way, I'm from Makassar too, and
okay.
I will ask. I ever hear like when I'm senior high school in Makassar, and I hear the situations in Makassar, like the Bilibili Dam is a big dam in Makassar. 2019, Bilibili is overflowed due to the bad weather. And my question is how to government or any stakeholder to handle that for being like it doesn't happen again.
Oh, you mean how we deal with that so it won't happen again?
Yes, because Bilibili is a big dam in Makassar, so if they like the overload, so the city of Makassar will be like disaster. Okay.
Yeah, I think to answer that question will be more relevant to the engineers who usually have solution when dealing with this, but from my memory, the Maminasata government back then trying to take out basically rehabilitate the Bilibili Dam because the sedimentation has so high in terms of the rate. So they are doing some rehabilitation to take out the sedimentation. So that is one of the solution, and I believe many engineers will know more than me to answer that question. So I don't want to sort of come into that domain if okay. Yeah.
Well, of course, sedimentation is a tremendous problem in Indonesia, where we have many dams, and it's a problem I know personally, having looked at Jatiluhur. Loss of the capacity, the storage capacity because of sedimentation. And dredging that sediment out is, of course, difficult and an expensive task.
Yeah.
And this really comes back to trying to take better care of the upstream catchment area and reduce soil erosion, which is one of the things that you did look at.
Yes. So the Hasanuddin University trying to basically identify the local wisdom on looking after the upper catchment. So I don't know what the result is, but back then basically they encourage people upper catchment to apply the local wisdom in order to sort of helping reducing the soil erosion. So that could be another answer, but brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to butt in there because I've worked on dam security in the UK and to some extent here in Indonesia, and all dams are designed to pass floods safely. Often the problem is that people who are producing hydropower, to maximize hydropower, they keep the water level too high, even during the wet season when they should be allowing storage for floods. And when it gets to a critical level, they'll suddenly open the gates, which has caused the floods downstream of Jatilahore. And in one event, 18,000 people had to be evacuated when the flood came through. But it's now being managed better by the Large Dams project based in Jakarta. So I shouldn't worry too much about overflowing the dam. It's the water level diminishing and dropping below the level at which it can be used optimally that is the problem. And I think basically that's what we're talking about today here in Makassar, is the problem of shortage of water rather than when there's too much.
Right, well, we have another question from Kania Losiana. Kania Losiana, can we hear your question? Otherwise, I'll read it.
Yeah. I want to ask something. I want to ask, what is the impact of climate change in Makassar on the flood in Makassar? Because I see on your last graph that the rainfall because of climate change is decreasing all season. I want to know, is the flood is decreased or increased?
Okay, thank you, Kasiana. So what I showed is the mean rainfall, which is like a long-term average kind of thing. But as we know, there are also a measure of extreme rainfall. So there is a variability in addition to the mean. So even though the mean decreasing, the potential for extreme rainfall is increasing over there, according to the modeling that we found. So that means the heavy rainfall in a particular year, for example, could be increasing, meaning there is a risk of, of flood. That's number one. Number two, also, we assess the intensity of rainfall concurrent 3 days or 4 days, things like that, because that determine the level of Mount Wakareng landslide, for example, which happened in around 2011 when the Mount Bakarang sort of, felt landslide happening. The whole city PDAM water is becoming unusable, basically. So the answer is basically, yes, there is a potential impact on flooding due to the increase in high extreme rainfall event.
Right, thank you, Kanya, for that question. Mike Doby appears to have his hand up.
Yes, Chris, if I may, first of all, Dewi, that was a really well presented series of bits of information, which was, I mean, it was enlightening for me, especially I'm a geotechnical engineer, and it's very interesting to hear such detail in this field. But my observation is, or question is really like this, a very general one, but we seem here in Indonesia, or certainly in Jakarta at the moment, we're going through a wet season that seems to be significantly longer than it normally is. And your numbers show that compared to Australia, we really shouldn't be having any problems very much in Indonesia. Yet I'm just wondering, you showed how Makassar is kind of potentially heading towards difficulties, yet it seems to be not recognized there. What's the situation like for the Greater Jakarta area? If you were to plot similar graphs for the Greater Jakarta area as you had for Makassar, how do we compare in this part of Indonesia?
Okay, for Jakarta, we have not done a specific study for Jakarta, so I cannot answer based on the study that we did. Having said that, though, based on the literature review or the Interpanel of Climate Change latest sort of report, I could say that in the tropic, even though the mean rainfall maybe not change too much, or if it is increased not too much, if it is decreased not too much, but the variability is increasing, meaning that the wet season could be shorter, it could be the dry season could be longer, and it could be also, say, the dry season supposedly coming in April, but coming in May, for example. So that's on the seasonal aspect of it. On the extreme event, that is where most concern is actually. So what I'm trying to say is, even though the mean climate doesn't change much in the tropic over Indonesia or over Jakarta, but the extreme weather event increasing potentially. And that is where most concern is. Yeah. So I hope I answer your question.
No, thank you. No, it is interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously, yeah, extreme events are things we have to be concerned about and know about. I mean, in an area I work in, which would be designed for earthquakes, it's the same thing. Maybe if we had an extreme event earthquake at the same time as an extreme event climatic change, it could be rather serious. But let's just hope they don't come at the same moment.
So, for example, just to give you idea on Australia or in the Pacific that we just did, for example, the extreme event of rainfall that used to be like 1 in 100 years, it could become 1 in 70 years or in 150 years. So that is what I'm trying to inform here. Yeah.
Right, at that point, I think we have to close because I've been told we're going to get shut down in a few minutes, or even less than a few minutes. I did ask before we started how much we could overrun, and I was told 7:15 was the limit. So we're almost on 7:15. So I'd like to thank you very much indeed for taking the trouble to prepare that interesting presentation for us and for staying up late to talk to us. It's really a great pleasure to see you again and to learn about your work.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you, and to everyone, thank you for attending and participating, and we'll hope to see you at the next JLA meeting. Thank you. Oh, I'm supposed to hand back to the MC, aren't I? I think. Where's Ariel?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chris Sandeman, for guiding this session. And thank you also to Mr. David for your opening remarks. And thanks you also for your Ms. Dewi Kirono for your excellent presentation. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the end of the event. Once again, thank you for your participation We hope we can see you at the next event. You can access your S certificate by visiting the link in below or chat column. Finally, good evening and stay healthy, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and thanks, Dr. Dewi.
Thank you, Pak David.